We all know the global superstars of BTS for their blinding smiles, chaotic humor, and heart-melting charm. But have you ever wondered what happens when the cameras stop rolling and things go horribly wrong? Who actually freezes the entire room with a single piercing glare? Who makes even the most veteran staff members hold their breath in pure terror? Behind the endless laughter lies a fascinating dynamic of intense professionalism and raw, unfiltered emotion. Are you brave enough to find out who truly rules the dark side of Bangtan when their patience finally runs out? Buckle up and prepare to be shocked, because we are diving deep into the unspoken behind-the-scenes secrets of the top 7 BTS members who are the scariest when angry.
Number 7. Jin, the fake maknae's dark shift, a chilling silence that freezes the room. If you are a hardcore ARMY or even just a casual listener who occasionally watches Run BTS and behind-the-scenes documentary content, you already know Kim Sok-jin as the absolute, undisputed mood maker of the group. The self-proclaimed and globally recognized worldwide handsome who never hesitates to blow his signature, dramatically extravagant flying kisses to the camera. He is the guy cracking those legendary pun-filled dad jokes that leave Jimin literally falling off his chair in uncontrollable laughter, and he's the one who constantly lets the younger members, especially Jungkook, treat him like a giant, broad-shouldered teddy bear or a human punching bag. We are also incredibly used to his iconic squeaky windshield wiper laugh, his exaggerated pouting, and his seemingly endless, saint-like patience as the beloved fake maknae of Bangtan. But have you ever paused to think about what happens when the laughter suddenly stops? Imagine this intense, nerve-wracking scenario. You are standing in a bustling, high-stress backstage room filled with chaotic, deafening noise. Makeup artists are frantically rushing around with hairspray and powder. Stylists are making last-minute wardrobe adjustments. The younger members are loudly bickering over snacks or playing video games, and the usual pre-concert adrenaline is pumping heavily through the humid air. The pressure of performing for 70,000 screaming fans in a massive stadium is crushing. Then suddenly, something goes wrong. Maybe it's a persistent, frustrating timing issue in the choreography that keeps failing during rehearsals, a sudden lack of professional focus from the team, or someone, perhaps a new staff member, an overstepping director, or a stressed-out bandmate, crossing an invisible but crucial boundary of respect. In a fraction of a second, the bubbly, overly dramatic, pink-loving Sok-jin completely disappears, and what replaces him is the raw, unfiltered, and deeply intimidating presence of the eldest Hayoung. The shift is so sudden, so jarring, and so absolute that it legitimately sends cold shivers down the spines of the production staff, the managers, and the members alike. When Jin gets truly angry, he does not usually throw violent tantrums, he doesn't scream at the top of his lungs, and he doesn't dramatically flip tables. Instead, he does something much more terrifying. He completely strips away the warm, welcoming, deeply comforting persona he wears so effortlessly every single day. His posture straightens up, revealing his true physical size. Those famously broad shoulders suddenly seem to expand and take up the entire room, blocking out the light. His highly expressive, usually sparkling eyes turn totally blank, dark, and unreadable, losing all their familiar warmth in an instant. You have to remember his educational background here. Jin actually majored in acting at the prestigious Jungkook University. He knows exactly how to control every single micro-expression on his face. When he drops the cheerful, idle smile, his face transforms into that of a strict, unyielding CEO or a terrifying movie antagonist, completely devoid of any softness. Furthermore, you absolutely have to remember the deep, complex cultural context of South Korea to truly understand the gravity of this transformation. In Korean society, the age hierarchy is a very real, very heavy, and very respected system. For years, Jin has intentionally lowered his own status, swallowing his immense pride and acting intentionally silly purely to make the younger members feel comfortable, effectively breaking down the rigid traditional age barriers that often suffocate and destroy K-pop groups from the inside out. He willingly chose to play the fool so BTS could function as a true, tightly knit family rather than a strict, military-like corporate unit where the youngest live in constant fear of the oldest. But do not ever, under any circumstances, mistake his profound kindness for weakness. Behind the scenes, veteran staff members, music video directors, and bodyguards have quietly noted that when Jin is in a serious, frustrated, or genuinely angry mood, he is arguably the most unapproachable and frightening member of them all. His silence is incredibly loud, thick, and deafening. A classic, heart-wrenching example of this terrifying shift was documented in the emotionally raw Burn the Stage docuseries, specifically during the infamous and highly publicized argument with V right before their massive Wings tour concert. V had pointed out an issue with Jin's timing, speed, and spacing during a high-energy routine, pushing the critique just a little too hard and a little too relentlessly when everyone was already physically exhausted, sleep-deprived, and stressed out to their absolute physical and mental limits. At first, Jin tried to maintain the peace, calmly trying to absorb the critique and reasonably explaining his physical limitations, his running speed, and the immense effort he was putting into making the difficult choreography work. But when the back and forth continued and the tension skyrocketed to a boiling point, Jin's entire demeanor violently snapped. His voice, usually so high-pitched, loud, and melodic, dropped completely into a chilling, breathy, and extremely low register. He looked directly at V with a completely unrecognizable expression, cold, deeply authoritative, and radiating a profound, unyielding frustration, and firmly stated that he was doing his absolute best and that he was the one making the compromises. The air in that cramped dressing room instantly turned to pure ice. You could literally see the temperature drop in the room. Even RM, the group's sturdy, incredibly intelligent leader, who usually mediates everything with ease, looked genuinely unnerved and didn't dare to immediately intervene, while the rest of the members, Jimin, Jungkook, H-Hope, and Suga, went dead silent, awkwardly and nervously looking down at their feet, afraid to even breathe too loudly. You could literally feel the crushing gravity of the eldest Hayoung finally asserting his absolute, undeniable authority, shutting down the argument not with explosive rage, but with a terrifyingly calm, heavy finality that left absolutely no room for further debate. It is in these incredibly rare, highly intense moments that you suddenly realize the massive, unseen weight Kim Sok-jin carries on his shoulders every single day. He's the quiet anchor of BTS, the emotional shock absorber who constantly takes the hits, diffuses the tension with his ridiculous jokes, and sacrifices his own cool image so the others don't have to bear the burden of stress. But every anchor has its absolute breaking point, and every shield can only take so many blows before it violently strikes back. When a staff member disrespects the group, when an interviewer crosses the line with an inappropriate question, or when a situation threatens their hard-earned harmony, Jin's protective, no-nonsense, fiercely loyal side comes out in full, terrifying force. He's been known to step physically in front of the younger members when crowds get too aggressive at airports, his eyes flashing with a dangerous warning that screams, "Do not touch my brothers." He's been known to pull members aside and scold them privately with a strictness that leaves them deeply humbled, reminding them of their humble roots, their manners, and their responsibilities to each other and to the millions of fans watching them. The sheer mind-boggling contrast between the goofy guy who wears ridiculous pink outfits, straps giant plushy hats to his head at airports, and intentionally embarrasses himself on national television, and the cold, unyielding, hyper-professional man who glares down anyone who messes with his team is absolutely mind-blowing. It makes you realize that his usual goofy persona is not just who he is. It's actually a deliberate, loving, and highly intelligent choice, a selfless sacrifice he continuously makes for the team's ultimate morale, mental health, and survival. So, when he finally decides to drop that cheerful mask and lets the real, imposing, traditional eldest Hayoung step into the glaring light, the psychological impact is absolutely devastating.
Number 6. RM.
The intellectual fury of the leader, a suffocating aura, the deep, low register that commands absolute order. When we look at Kim Namjoon, we see the brilliant, philosophical mastermind of BTS, the gentle giant who spends his precious free time riding bicycles through peaceful parks, visiting quiet art museums, and reading deeply profound literature. We know him as the incredibly endearing, clumsy guy who accidentally breaks everything he touches, loses his passport in almost every single country the group visits, and needs a designated member just to make sure he doesn't accidentally injure himself on a daily basis. He is the visionary poet who stood proudly before the United Nations, delivering a historic, deeply moving speech about self-love and youth that inspired millions of people across the globe. But you must never forget that beneath this artistic, soft, and deeply intellectual exterior lies the absolute commander-in-chief of the world's biggest musical phenomenon. Carrying the explosive weight of BTS's global success on his shoulders since he was just a teenager is an unfathomable burden. And when that immense pressure collides with a complete lack of professionalism, Namjoon's anger transforms into a terrifyingly intense, suffocating force that can completely paralyze a room. His fury is not a loud, chaotic, uncontrolled explosion. Rather, it is the cold, calculated, and deeply imposing wrath of a hyper-focused genius who demands absolute perfection from everyone around him. Imagine a high-stakes, incredibly chaotic backstage environment during a massive international award show like the Grammys or the Billboards, where the entire global media is watching their every single move. The air is thick with tension, technical difficulties are popping up left and right, the stage monitors are malfunctioning, and the production staff is running around like headless chickens, completely failing to organize the schedule. In moments like these, when the team's hard work is threatened by pure incompetence, Namjoon's gentle, dimpled smile completely vanishes in a fraction of a second, replaced by an aura so incredibly heavy and dominant that it physically alters the atmosphere of the room. Standing at an imposing height of over 181 centimeters with a broad, powerfully athletic frame, his sheer physical presence becomes immediately terrifying. He doesn't scream, he doesn't throw childish tantrums, and he doesn't use profanity. Instead, his voice drops into an ultra-low, dangerously gravelly and vibrating frequency that cuts straight through the loudest noise like a razor-sharp knife. When Namjoon speaks in that specific ice-cold leader register, every single person in the room, from the highest-ranking executive producers to the youngest makeup assistants, instantly stops what they are doing, completely frozen in their tracks. Behind the scenes, veteran staff members have quietly shared stories about how incredibly intimidating Namjoon can be when he is genuinely displeased with a situation. He will stand perfectly still in the center of the room, lock his arms tightly across his chest, and pierce the individual responsible with a sharp, intensely analytical gaze that makes you feel like you are being completely disassembled under a microscope. He uses incredibly precise, logical, and articulation-heavy language to break down exactly what went wrong, leaving absolutely zero room for excuses, deflections, or lazy explanations. It is the psychological weight of his sheer intellect that makes his anger so profoundly terrifying. He doesn't just make you feel scared, he makes you feel incredibly small and deeply ashamed of your lack of professionalism. This terrifying side of his leadership is especially evident during grueling, high-pressure international press tours. For years, as the only fluent English speaker in the group, Namjoon had to carry the immense, exhausting responsibility of navigating foreign media entirely on his own. He had to constantly translate complex questions for his members, protect them from backhanded, disrespectful, or xenophobic remarks from Western interviewers, and simultaneously formulate brilliant, diplomatic answers on the fly, all while battling severe jet lag and physical exhaustion. Staff members have noted that if an interviewer or a production crew crosses a line of basic human respect or treats the members like a mere passing trend, Namjoon's polite, charming public persona
persona instantly shuts down. His eyes turn into dead, unreadable daggers, and he will handle the situation with a cold, fiercely sharp corporate professionalism that completely dominates the room, subtly dismantling the offensive interviewer with sophisticated, razor-sharp words that leave them completely red-faced and deeply humbled. But his terrifying authority isn't just directed at external staff. It is also a vital tool for maintaining absolute discipline within the group itself. The members of BTS are famously chaotic, incredibly loud, and full of explosive energy, often playing around and joking even when they are supposed to be focusing on a serious brief or an important sound check. But the exact second Namjoon decides that the playing has gone too far, he will utter a single, short, and intensely firm command, or simply call out a member's name in that specific, heavy tone, and the entire group will instantly fall into a dead, obedient silence. The members themselves have openly admitted in various interviews and documentary commentaries that they hold a profound, unshakable respect for Namjoon's leadership, but they also harbor a very real, healthy fear of making him genuinely angry. Disappointing Namjoon is considered the absolute ultimate failure within the group dynamic because everyone knows just how much he sacrifices, how much mental torment he endures behind the scenes, and how fiercely he protects the integrity of BTS. His anger is a rare, precious, and deeply serious event, meaning that when it actually surfaces, it signifies that a major boundary has been crossed or that the quality of their art is being compromised. It's an inspiring yet deeply chilling reminder of what it truly takes to lead a global empire. It requires a man who can be a loving, compassionate brother one moment and a completely ruthless, uncompromising boss the next. Namjoon balances this impossible tightrope with absolute mastery, using his cold, intellectual fury not to destroy, but to fiercely protect, organize, and elevate his team to unprecedented heights. Staff members who have witnessed him in this hyper-serious state describe it as an unforgettable experience that commands absolute, unquestioned obedience without him ever having to raise his hand or lose his composure. He is the ultimate shield and the ultimate judge, proving that a leader's truest weapon isn't a loud voice, but an unyielding, terrifyingly sharp mind that refuses to accept anything less than absolute greatness. And as we leave the heavy, suffocating aura of the leader, the tension only continues to skyrocket. Tell me when you are ready for number 5, because the next member will completely shatter everything you thought you knew about their gentle personality.
Number 5. Jimin, the angel's fallen halo. The piercing eye smile turned deadly, a bone-chilling contrast. When you think of Park Jimin, the absolute first image that floods your mind is probably that of a literal, real-life angel. He is the resident sweetheart, the incredibly affectionate fairy of Bangtan, who is always, without fail, the very first person to rush over and wrap a comforting arm around a crying member when the crushing pressures of global stardom become just a little too much to bear. We are all deeply mesmerized by his ethereally soft vocals that soar into impossible registers, his breathtakingly graceful contemporary dance moves that look like pure poetry in motion, and that signature heart-melting eye smile that completely squishes his cheeks and makes the entire world want to protect him at all costs. He is the guy who writes heartwarming, deeply emotional letters to ARMY during the dead of night, the one who constantly bakes cakes for the other members' birthdays, and the delicate soul who literally falls out of his chair giggling uncontrollably at the absolute slightest provocation. He radiates pure, unadulterated warmth, making him arguably the most approachable and emotionally transparent idol in the entire K-pop industry. But, and this is a massive, incredibly crucial, and genuinely terrifying but that you absolutely need to mentally prepare yourself for. What happens when you push this gentle, endlessly patient angel just a little too far past his absolute breaking point? What happens when the soft, squishy mochi suddenly hardens into cold, impenetrable, and completely unforgiving steel? If you actually take the time to ask any of the other 6 BTS members who they genuinely fear the absolute most when tempers inevitably flare behind closed doors, their answer is almost always unanimous, immediate, and spoken with a very real sense of awe: Park Jimin. The sheer, mind-bending psychological contrast between his usual loving, physically affectionate demeanor and his genuine, unfiltered anger is so incredibly extreme and jarring that it induces a unique, visceral kind of terror that veteran staff members, music video directors, and seasoned backup dancers quietly whisper about in the industry. To truly understand the terrifying, bottomless depth of Jimin's anger, you have to look deeply into his intense, fiercely competitive, and incredibly demanding past. Long before he was ever known as the delicate contemporary dancer of BTS, Jimin trained rigorously and brutally in traditional kendo and taekwondo for over 8 long years, achieving a black belt and naturally developing an incredibly strict, almost militaristic sense of physical discipline, absolute respect for hierarchy, and razor-sharp martial arts focus. Furthermore, you absolutely have to remember the deeply traumatic, highly stress-inducing pre-debut story of his journey to the stage. Jimin was the very last member to join BTS as a trainee, experiencing a brutal, soul-crushing training period where he was almost kicked out of the final debut lineup a staggering 8 different times by the company executives. He literally survived those dark, uncertain days by sleeping only 2 hours a single night, obsessively practicing his dancing and vocals in cold, empty studios until his muscles completely gave out. That intense, desperate, life-or-death fight for survival forged an unbreakable, fiercely protective, and ruthlessly perfectionist core that is permanently hidden right beneath his sweet, bubbly exterior. When Jimin actually gets angry, the physical and atmospheric transformation is absolutely bone-chilling to witness. The famous sparkling eye smile that fans adore completely vanishes in a microsecond, and his eyes widen, turning into cold, dark, and terrifyingly piercing daggers that feel like they are staring directly into your very soul. He possesses a remarkably intense resting face, and when his jaw physically clenches, his posture straightens, and his gaze goes dead, the entire atmosphere of the room instantly violently shifts from lighthearted chaos to a heavy, suffocating dread. Unlike Jin's silent authority or Namjoon's intellectual dominance, Jimin's anger is incredibly sharp, highly emotional, extremely direct, and undeniably confrontational. If he sees someone slacking off during a crucial dance practice, disrespecting an overworked staff member, or treating a highly anticipated performance like it is just a casual joke, the angelic fairy is instantly and mercilessly replaced by a strict, uncompromising, and deeply intimidating Busan man. When he speaks in this state, he completely abandons his usual soft soul accent and immediately drops into his deep, incredibly rough, and highly aggressive natural Busan satire. Any Korean native will instantly tell you that hearing an angry man speak in a thick, unfiltered Busan dialect is easily one of the most intimidating experiences you can ever face, as it naturally carries a very rough, dominant, street-tough energy that completely commands the room. There are legendary behind-the-scenes stories from backup dancers about Jimin's terrifyingly intense aura during massive stadium concert rehearsals. If the synchronization of the dance crew is even a fraction of a single second off, Jimin will not hesitate to stop the entire massive production right in its tracks. He just stands perfectly still in the dead center of the massive stadium, locks his cold, unblinking eyes on the specific person making the mistake, and delivers a profoundly sharp, cutting reprimand that instantly snaps every single person present into a state of terrified, hyper-focused attention. Even his fellow members, who are global superstars in their own right, are genuinely terrified of provoking this specific side of him. V, his self-proclaimed platonic soulmate, has publicly stated on multiple live broadcasts that an actually angry Jimin is the absolute scariest thing he has ever witnessed, openly admitting that he immediately backs down whenever he sees Jimin's tone drop. J-Hope, famously known as the group's eagle-eyed dance leader, has also openly confessed that he purposefully avoids criticizing Jimin too harshly because Jimin's intense perfectionism will cause him to fiercely snap if he feels his immense effort is being undervalued. During the highly stressful filming of exhausting reality shows, if the notoriously playful younger members start completely crossing the line from brotherly teasing into genuine disrespect, Jimin is almost always the one who steps in to instantly shut it down. He will unleash a single, deadly, unblinking glare and deliver a short, deeply commanding sentence in raw satire that literally freezes the maknaes in their tracks, transforming them back into obedient professionals. The sheer psychological terror of his anger comes entirely from the fact that we are all conditioned to see him as this fragile, overly affectionate fairy. When he suddenly reveals the battle-hardened, fiercely loyal Busan man hiding under all those soft pastel sweaters, it absolutely shatters your entire perception of his reality. It forcibly makes you realize that his endless kindness and angelic patience are not just natural traits, they are deliberate, highly controlled choices made every single day by a profoundly strong, incredibly disciplined man who actively chooses peace over absolute dominance. But the very second you dare to threaten his beloved team or compromise the absolute perfection of their hard-earned performance, the beautiful angel violently sheds his golden halo, unsheathes his hidden sword, and becomes a fiercely intimidating force of nature that absolutely nobody dares to cross. It is a stunning, deeply inspiring, emotionally complex, and absolutely terrifying testament to the true duality of Park Jimin. And if you genuinely think the bone-chilling silent fury of the sweet Busan angel is enough to make you rethink everything you know about this adored group, just wait until you uncover the horrifying truth about the very next member waiting in the shadows on our list. Are you actually brave enough to witness the explosive intensity that is about to come?
Number 4. Jungkook, the golden maknae's boiling point. A physical powerhouse unleashed, the silent stare of utter defiance. When we think of Jungkook, the absolute first image that floods our minds is the incredibly endearing, wide-eyed golden maknae of BTS, the phenomenally talented prodigy who was practically raised by his 6 older brothers since he was just 15 years old. We all know and deeply love him as the incredibly shy, naturally introverted boy who used to wait until all the other members fell completely asleep just so he could take a shower in their cramped, tiny dorm without feeling overwhelmingly awkward. He's the guy who famously loves his banana milk, giggles with an adorable nose-scrunching bunny smile, and possesses such a naturally pure, innocent, and profoundly empathetic heart that he literally cried his eyes out when he realized how much his older brothers were silently struggling behind closed doors. We are all so completely accustomed to seeing him goofing around, playfully teasing Jin to no end, effortlessly carrying the other members on his back like they weigh absolutely nothing, and dazzling the entire globe with his angelic live vocals and mind-bending, gravity-defying dance moves. But there is a deeply hidden, fiercely intense, and physically overwhelming side to this beloved maknae that completely shatters that innocent illusion the absolute second his patience is pushed to the ultimate limit. To truly comprehend the visceral, heart-stopping terror of an angry Jungkook, you have absolutely got to understand the sheer, unparalleled physical power he possesses and the incredibly intense, obsessive perfectionism that burns relentlessly inside his soul. We are talking about a fiercely dedicated man who spends his precious free time relentlessly hitting heavy boxing bags, mastering complex mixed martial arts routines, and lifting impossibly heavy weights until his muscles are pushed to the absolute brink of failure. He is, without a single shred of doubt, the most physically dominant and athletic member of the entire group, heavily covered in a full sleeve of striking, deeply meaningful tattoos that loudly broadcast his rebellious, unyielding rock star spirit to the world.
So what exactly happens when you take all of that raw, explosive, tightly coiled physical energy and mix it with a sudden, overwhelming surge of genuine anger or intense frustration? The result is an absolutely terrifying, volcanic pressure cooker that makes everyone in the immediate vicinity feel like they are standing dangerously close to an active bomb waiting to detonate at any given second. When Jungkook gets genuinely angry, he does not usually direct his rage at others through loud screaming, chaotic tantrums, or petty arguments. Instead, his immense anger manifests as a deeply internalized, intensely physical, and terrifyingly silent storm of dark energy that completely suffocates the entire room. The absolute most chilling part is the immediate, drastic transformation in his famously huge, expressive doe eyes. Those round, sparkling eyes that usually radiate so much youthful innocence instantly narrow into a sharp, predatory, and incredibly dark glare that genuinely looks like it could casually pierce straight through solid concrete and shatter your soul. Because he is generally a man of very few words when it comes to expressing negative emotions, his heavy silence becomes his absolute most terrifying weapon. Veteran staff members, backstage directors, and seasoned concert crew hands have quietly noted that when the golden maknae is deeply upset, an incredibly thick, dark cloud seems to physically descend upon him, creating an invisible, impenetrable force field of pure intimidation that absolutely no one dares to cross. A prime, deeply emotional, and raw example of this terrifying intensity is frequently seen behind the scenes during their massive, high-stakes global stadium tours, particularly when he feels he has underperformed or made a nearly invisible mistake on stage. Jungkook's personal standard for perfectionism is so incredibly extreme, so utterly uncompromising, that a single missed note, an unforgiving malfunctioning earpiece, or a slightly mistimed choreography step will trigger an intensely dark, punishing fury directed squarely at himself. Documentary footage from emotionally heavy series like Burn the Stage and Bring the Soul have perfectly captured these incredibly raw, frightening moments where Jungkook, completely exhausted and practically gasping for air, walks off the massive stage with an expression of such pure, unadulterated devastation and intense frustration that the entire bustling backstage crew instantly falls into a terrified, pin-drop silence. He will completely isolate himself in the darkest corner of the green room, his heavily tattooed arms crossed defensively over his broad chest, actively refusing all medical assistance, oxygen tanks, or comforting words from the panicked staff. In those heavy, agonizing moments, his aura is so intensely dark, fierce, and unapproachable that even his closest, most seasoned managers hesitate to even breathe in his direction, knowing full well that any interference will only fan the raging flames of his own brutal self-criticism. But this deeply terrifying, silent fury is not just exclusively reserved for his own perceived failures. It violently and unapologetically surfaces in absolute defense of his beloved older brothers. You must constantly remember that Jungkook literally built his entire life, his core personality, and his fundamental belief system around the 6 men who lovingly raised him in the harsh environment of Seoul. His famous, heart-wrenching solo track, Begin, explicitly states that he physically hurts far more when his brothers are crying than when he is enduring his own immense pain. If an external staff member, a careless production director, or an invasive, totally disrespectful interviewer treats his hyungs with even a microscopic level of disrespect or condescension, the sweet, submissive maknae completely vanishes into thin air. In his place stands a fiercely protective, fiercely dominant, and physically imposing man who will not hesitate for a single second to use his large, muscular frame strategically between his vulnerable members and the perceived threat, locking his dark, cold eyes onto the offender with an unblinking, terrifyingly blank expression that screams a very clear, very dangerous warning that demands immediate compliance. His fellow members, who naturally and constantly treat him like a giant, lovable baby most of the time, are profoundly aware of this dangerous, explosive threshold. They know for an absolute fact that when Jungkook goes completely silent and his eyes take on that specific, dead, and utterly unreadable quality, it is the absolute final warning sign to immediately back off, lower their voices, and completely change the subject before the situation escalates beyond repair. The sheer, mind-boggling contrast between the emotional boy who openly weeps over missing his beautiful fans and the heavily tattooed, fiercely unstoppable powerhouse who completely shuts down a massive room with a single deadly glare is exactly what makes his anger so uniquely terrifying and awe-inspiring. It is a beautifully frightening, deeply emotional testament to his raw, untamed passion, his uncompromising artistic integrity, and his fiercely unwavering loyalty to the only true family he has ever known in this brutal, cutthroat entertainment industry. It forcibly reminds us all that the golden maknae is no longer just a sweet, innocent teenager desperately trying to fit in. He is a fully grown, fiercely powerful, and deeply intimidating man who demands absolute perfection and absolute respect, possessing the sheer physical and psychological dominance to effortlessly enforce his will. When you fully realize that the man who breaks down in tears out of pure gratitude is the exact same man who can completely paralyze an entire arena production crew with a single devastating glance, you finally begin to understand the true multifaceted complexity of Jungkook. His anger is a rare, terrifyingly beautiful phenomenon that naturally commands absolute respect and deeply humbles anyone who is lucky, or rather profoundly unlucky enough to witness it firsthand. Are you truly prepared to uncover the chilling, dark secrets of the top 3 scariest members, or are you secretly wishing you had never dared to peek behind this highly intimidating curtain? The countdown is far from over, and the intense danger is only rapidly escalating from here.
Number 3. V. The blank canvas of dread, a sudden freeze of emotion, the unpredictable silence that shakes the soul. When we think of Kim Tae-young, widely known to the entire globe as V, our minds are instantly and overwhelmingly flooded with the incredibly warm, deeply endearing image of the ultimate social butterfly of BTS, the incredibly handsome, jazz-loving, heavily artistic soul who views the entire chaotic world through a deeply romantic, vintage lens. We absolutely adore his iconic, rectangular, boxy smile that effortlessly lights up massive, sold-out stadiums across the globe, his delightfully eccentric, highly unpredictable sense of humor that the massive fandom affectionately dubbed Tay-Tay language, and his profoundly gentle, almost childlike innocence when he is playfully interacting with his beloved Pomeranian, Bangtan, or eagerly making fast friends with literally anyone he happens to meet, ranging from legendary veteran actors to random, unknown photographers wandering on the busy streets of Europe. He is the brilliant, incredibly empathetic man who successfully coined the globally recognized beautiful phrase, "I purple you," which stands as a monumental testament to his incredibly deep, unconditionally loving heart and his profound, unbreakable emotional connection with millions upon millions of fiercely loyal fans worldwide. For many long, highly successful years, the unforgiving entertainment industry and the general public have consistently viewed him as this ethereal, untouchable, and deeply mesmerizing muse, a breathtakingly gorgeous, almost unreal visual whose head always seems to be peacefully lost in the clouds, constantly dreaming of classical orchestral music, obscure, heavily textured oil paintings, and highly abstract, deeply emotional photography.
But what exactly happens when you deliberately and forcefully rip this deeply sensitive, heavily introverted artist completely out of his peaceful, romantic daydream and aggressively push his immense, heavily guarded patience far past the absolute point of no return? What happens when an individual actively disrespects his profound sense of loyalty, aggressively invades his heavily guarded, deeply cherished personal space, or foolishly treats his genuine, pure-hearted kindness as a naive, easily exploitable weakness? The terrifying, deeply unsettling reality is that when Kim Tae-young is pushed to his absolute, undeniable breaking point, his anger absolutely does not manifest as a fiery, loud, explosive outburst, nor does it appear as a highly aggressive physical display of alpha dominance. Instead, it is an incredibly sudden, drastically unnerving, and profoundly psychological freeze that completely and instantly drains the living energy straight out of the room. It is a terrifying, deeply silent phenomenon that highly seasoned staff members, giant, intimidating bodyguards, and even his 6 closest bandmates deeply dread experiencing, primarily because it is so utterly unpredictable, heavily layered, and completely emotionally impenetrable. When V gets genuinely, truly angry, the playful, vibrant, deeply expressive good boy persona completely vanishes into thin air without a single trace, and his incredibly striking, flawlessly sculpted, globally adored face drastically transforms into an absolutely blank, terrifyingly unreadable, and completely unforgiving canvas. Die-hard fans have long known about his endearing, deeply relatable habit of completely spacing out during highly chaotic interviews, affectionately calling this cute phenomenon blank Tae. But when that exact same blankness is heavily fueled by genuine, unfiltered, and deeply internalized fury, it violently morphs into a devastating, heavily paralyzing psychological weapon. His large, incredibly expressive eyes, which are incredibly famous for their unique, highly captivating asymmetry, featuring one monolid and one double eyelid, instantly lose every single microscopic ounce of their signature, soul-warming light, turning into cold, dead, and deeply unblinking voids that aggressively stare straight through your physical body, as if your entire existence has completely ceased to matter in his reality. You absolutely have to constantly remember that Tae-young is not merely just a highly successful, globally dominant pop idol. He is also a highly capable, critically acclaimed, and formally trained actor who made his highly impressive, deeply emotional debut in the intense, physically demanding historical K-drama Hwarang. Because of this intense, highly disciplined background, he naturally possesses an absolute, terrifying mastery over his own deeply complex facial micro-expressions. When he finally makes the conscious, heavily deliberate decision to completely shut down his emotional availability to the outside world, he executes it with the cold, calculated, and deeply precise perfection of a seasoned veteran, completely severing any remaining empathetic or emotional connection with the specific person who wronged him. There are numerous chilling, highly whispered behind-the-scenes accounts from completely chaotic airport mobbings and deeply invasive, horrifyingly dangerous encounters with aggressive Sasang fans, where Tae-young's horrifyingly blank, completely silent anger was put on full, unfiltered, and highly public display. Instead of shouting, physically shoving people away, or throwing a loud, chaotic, and completely understandable tantrum when his fundamental personal boundaries are violently and repeatedly breached, he simply stops completely dead in his tracks, heavily squares his broad shoulders, and completely locks on to the specific offender with a deeply terrifying, utterly emotionless, and profoundly heavy stare. He has even been known to literally pull out his own smartphone and silently, heavily pretend to film or loudly photograph the aggressive, highly invasive stalkers right in their faces, brilliantly utilizing his terrifyingly calm, unapologetically defiant, and heavily intimidating physical presence to completely mentally dominate them and force them into aggressively backing down in pure shame. His incredibly deep, uniquely velvety baritone, which usually sings with such profound, deeply comforting soulful warmth and talks with a delightfully slow, highly melodic and incredibly soothing cadence, completely drops all of its playful, airy lilt and violently flattens out into an unrecognizable, heavy, monotone drawl that genuinely sounds like it is echoing directly from a deep, entirely frozen, completely empty cavern. When he speaks in this specific, highly detached and unsettling tone, the words are incredibly short, brutally direct, heavily calculated, and completely devoid of any underlying human emotion whatsoever, making the unfortunate listener feel incredibly small, deeply and heavily judged, and profoundly, terribly uncomfortable in their own skin. Even within the highly chaotic, extremely loud, and incredibly tight-knit brotherly dynamic of BTS, the other 6 deeply experienced members know exactly when they must completely back off and give him massive amounts of space when Taeyoung's striking face completely loses its animation. Because he is normally so incredibly deeply connected to his own intense emotions, completely unafraid of openly weeping when he is profoundly sad, and laughing with his entire physical body when he is genuinely happy, this sudden, aggressive, and highly deliberate absence of all visible emotion serves as the absolute ultimate red flag that a major, highly critical boundary has been completely shattered. It instantly creates an unbearable, deeply suffocating, and incredibly heavy tension in the air, because absolutely nobody, not even the people who have lived alongside him, eaten with him, and cried with him for more than a decade of intense time, can accurately predict what he is truly thinking or what highly dramatic move he will make next behind that flawless, completely impenetrable mask of absolute icy indifference.
Number 2. Suga, the ice-cold executioner, a brutal honesty, the unrelenting fire of the genius producer. When we think of Min Yoongi, globally celebrated as the musical genius Suga and the fiercely independent underground king August D, we immediately picture the notoriously introverted, wonderfully sarcastic, and delightfully sleepy grandpa of BTS, who would frankly rather be reincarnated as a motionless rock in his next life than participate in forced social interactions. He is the quiet, highly observant anchor who prefers sitting comfortably in the background, offering his signature gummy smile only when he is genuinely amused by the chaotic antics of his younger, much louder bandmates. We all know him as the deeply relatable introvert who openly champions mental health awareness, writes devastatingly profound lyrics about human suffering and perseverance, and quietly takes care of the members behind the scenes without ever making a big, flashy show of his deep affection. However, beneath this deeply calm, lethargic, and seemingly indifferent exterior lies an absolute, fiercely unyielding inferno of passion, a razor-sharp intellect, and an incredibly dark, fiercely protective underground hip-hop soul that absolutely does not tolerate even a single ounce of disrespect, laziness, or professional incompetence. To truly understand the absolute bone-chilling terror of an angry Min Yoongi, you have to look deeply into his grueling past as an impoverished underground rapper in Daegu, a young boy who literally starved, shattered his shoulder working dangerous delivery jobs just to pay his tuition, and battled severe depression, all while desperately trying to make his seemingly impossible musical dreams a reality against a world that constantly told him he would fail. Because he fought so brutally and sacrificed so immensely for his art, he treats music, performance, and the sanctity of his beloved group with a level of intense, uncompromising seriousness that is genuinely intimidating to witness. When someone, whether it is a careless sound engineer, a highly disrespectful interviewer, or even one of his own beloved members, crosses the line into unprofessionalism or disrespects the immense struggle that built BTS, the quiet, sleepy cat instantly transforms into a cold, fiercely unyielding executioner. Unlike the fiery, physically imposing outbursts you might expect from a traditional hip-hop artist, Yoongi's anger is a terrifying masterclass in absolute, ice-cold psychological warfare. He does not yell, he does not flail his arms, and he does not waste his precious energy on loud, chaotic tantrums. Instead, his entire physical presence becomes incredibly heavy, deeply rooted, and suffocatingly still. His small, piercing, famously sharp feline eyes completely narrow, losing whatever faint, warm amusement they previously held, and they lock on to the offender with an intensely calculating, deeply judgmental, and utterly emotionless glare that physically makes you feel like you are standing naked in a freezing blizzard. But the absolute most terrifying weapon in his entire arsenal is not his deadly stare. It is his legendary, deeply feared, and brutally unforgiving tongue. When Yoongi is genuinely angry, he unleashes a verbal onslaught of such profound, razor-sharp, and devastatingly logical honesty that it completely strips the offending person of any possible defense, excuse, or dignity. He is a lyrical genius who actively crafts multi-layered metaphors for a living, so when he decides to verbally dismantle you, he does it with the cold, surgical precision of a highly trained assassin, utilizing incredibly blunt, highly intellectual, and brutally factual statements that cut straight to the absolute core of your insecurities. Behind the scenes, highly experienced music producers, recording engineers, and veteran broadcast staff speak of Yoongi's anger with a deep, incredibly respectful sense of awe and fear. In the highly sacred, heavily locked confines of his personal recording studio, famously known as the Genius Lab, Yoongi operates as an absolute, uncompromising dictator. If a member steps into the recording booth unprepared, repeatedly messes up their vocal takes due to a lack of focus, or treats the recording process like a casual joke, Yoongi will instantly cut the instrumental track, lean heavily into the studio microphone, and deliver a completely flat, deeply disappointing, and brutally honest critique that instantly humbles even the most confident global superstars. He demands absolute perfection because he literally bleeds for every single track he produces, and his incredibly low tolerance for mediocrity forces everyone around him to immediately step up or be ruthlessly completely cut down by his sharp reprimands. This terrifyingly protective, fiercely loyal, and ice-cold anger is also violently unleashed whenever anyone attempts to degrade the artistic integrity of his beloved group or questions their hard-earned authenticity. There are incredibly famous, heavily documented instances of Yoongi utilizing his dark, unyielding fury to brilliantly annihilate his haters and disrespectful media personnel on massive global stages. Take the legendary moment at the SBS Gayo Daejeon, where BTS was heavily accused by vicious online haters of lip-syncing their incredibly intense performances. Instead of releasing a predictable, heavily sanitized PR statement or engaging in petty internet arguments, Yoongi took the stage, aggressively rapped his verse in mic drop with absolute, terrifying venom, and suddenly pulled his microphone completely away from his face in the middle of a blazing verse, staring dead straight into the main camera with a terrifyingly arrogant, ice-cold smirk, while the backing track played absolutely nothing but dead, heavy silence. It was a massive, deeply intimidating middle finger to the entire industry, executed with a level of dark, swaggering fury that only a true underground king could ever possibly pull off.
When a journalist dares to ask a condescending, deeply inappropriate, or highly invasive question during a global press conference, Yoongi is almost always the very first one to aggressively step up, his eyes turning into dark, impenetrable slits as he delivers a profoundly articulate, fiercely sharp, and completely irrefutable answer that instantly shuts the reporter down, leaving them entirely humiliated and deeply regretting their poor life choices in front of the entire international media. His fellow members possess a deeply profound, almost reverent fear of genuinely upsetting their second oldest young. While they constantly tease him and treat him like a grumpy, deeply lovable grandpa on daily variety shows, they inherently know that Yoongi's patience has a very hard, very absolute limit. When his voice drops an octave and he delivers a short, blunt sentence completely devoid of any emotion, the absolute loudest, most chaotic members instantly go dead silent, rapidly nodding in total, unquestioned agreement, because absolutely no one wants to be caught on the wrong, intensely agonizing side of Min Yoongi's brutally sharp intellect. He is the ultimate, incredibly heavy anchor of reality for the group, constantly keeping them deeply grounded, fiercely humble, and profoundly focused, utilizing his dark, unyielding, and terrifyingly cold fury as a massive, unbreakable shield to violently protect his brothers from the toxic, deeply predatory nature of the brutal entertainment world. It is this astonishing, deeply complex dichotomy between the incredibly vulnerable, openly weeping artist who creates profoundly healing music for millions, and the ice-cold, fiercely unapologetic executioner who will brutally dismantle anyone who threatens his family, that makes Min Yoongi's anger so incredibly fascinating, deeply inspiring, and undeniably terrifying. He proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that true, unyielding strength does not require an incredibly loud voice or a massive physical frame. It simply requires a mind sharp enough to cut through lies and a spirit fierce enough to burn down anything that stands in its way. And as we leave the freezing, deeply terrifying, and surgically precise psychological battlefield of Min Yoongi, we are finally forced to confront the absolute apex of our dark countdown. If the brutal, uncompromising honesty of the Genius Lab was sitting at only number 2, exactly what kind of unfathomable, world-shattering terror could possibly be waiting for us at the very top? Does the final member possess an anger so legendary, so incredibly intense, and deeply feared that even these other 6 global superstars tremble in his absolute presence?
Number 1. J-Hope, the sunshine's total eclipse, the smiling demon, the unforgiving dance captain who paralyzes the world. When you hear the globally celebrated name Jungkook, the very first thing that instantly explodes into your mind is a blindingly bright, overwhelmingly joyful ray of human sunshine who constantly introduces himself with the universally beloved catchphrase, "I am your hope, you are my hope, I am J-Hope." We all know him as the loud, hyperactive mood maker of BTS, who naturally provides endless hilarious sound effects, randomly breaks into energetic street dance battles in quiet dressing rooms, and possesses a stunningly bright, heart-shaped smile so incredibly warm that it can legitimately cure the darkest of days. He is the phenomenally supportive bridge between the older and younger members, the highly emotional guy who is absolutely terrified of massive roller coasters, tiny bugs, unexpected loud noises, and anything remotely scary, constantly screaming at the top of his lungs and physically hiding behind his taller members on countless Run BTS episodes. Because he projects such an overwhelmingly positive and comforting aura of pure love, the general public and newer casual fans naturally assume that he is the softest, most easily approachable, and least intimidating member of the entire record-breaking group. But if you actually take the time to sit down and seriously ask all 6 of his fellow bandmates, including the towering leader Namjoon, who commands global stages, the fiercely intimidating eldest brother Jin, who shuts down rooms with a single glance, and the brutally honest underground king Yoongi,
be who they are genuinely, absolutely, and undeniably terrified of the absolute most when things go horribly wrong. Their collective answer is always completely unanimous, spoken with a respectful shudder of true fear. Jungkook. The sheer, mind-bending, and completely horrifying psychological contrast between the giggling, easily frightened sunshine we see on camera and the terrifyingly strict, fiercely unforgiving dance captain of BTS hiding behind closed doors is the absolute biggest, most heavily guarded open secret in the cutthroat K-pop industry. To truly comprehend the visceral, heart-stopping terror of an actually angry J-Hope, you absolutely have to understand his profound, legendary roots as a highly respected, fiercely competitive street dancer from the harsh underground scene of Gwangju. Long before he was ever known as a glittering, highly successful global idol, he was already a famous, heavily decorated underground popping and boogaloo dancer in the legendary crew Neuron, deeply ingrained with a brutal, heavily disciplined, and ruthlessly uncompromising street-forged work ethic that violently separates the true masters of the craft from the mere weekend amateurs. Within the highly sacred, mirrored, and intensely sweaty walls of the official BTS dance practice studios, Kim Namjoon might be the official leader of the group who handles the heavy intellectual burdens, but absolutely everyone in the building, from the highest-ranking executive producers at HYBE to the most seasoned veteran backup dancers, knows exactly who the real, undisputed, and fiercely terrifying dictator of the rehearsal room truly is. When the heavy, soundproof studio doors loudly click shut and the grueling rehearsal finally begins, the bubbly, smiling, sound effect-making Hobie completely vanishes into thin air without a single trace, and the terrifying, ice-cold, and fiercely perfectionist dance captain Jung takes complete, unyielding, and absolute control over every single living soul in the room. The terrifying physical and atmospheric transformation is incredibly jarring to witness firsthand. His bright, beautiful, heart-shaped smile drastically flattens into an unbelievably cold, incredibly sharp, and utterly unreadable straight line that sends absolute shivers down your spine. His previously warm, laughing eyes instantly narrow into dark, heavily focused, and intensely predatory slits that methodically scan the entire massive room with the unblinking, laser-like precision of an apex predator actively hunting for its weakest prey. When J-Hope gets genuinely angry, highly frustrated by a shocking lack of absolute professionalism, or deeply disappointed by someone not giving their absolute 100% effort, he absolutely does not ever resort to screaming loudly, throwing childish tantrums, slamming doors, or utilizing any form of explosive emotional outbursts. Instead, his anger manifests as a deeply suffocating, incredibly heavy, and terrifyingly silent aura of absolute crushing disappointment that physically and aggressively crushes the breathable oxygen right out of the room, making it genuinely difficult for anyone nearby to even comfortably breathe. He possesses an incredibly terrifying, almost supernatural legendary ability to instantly spot a single, microscopic, barely visible mistake, a hand placed exactly 1 inch too low, a slight offbeat step, a terribly misaligned hip isolation, or even just a tiny momentary drop in physical energy within a chaotic, highly complex formation of dozens of incredibly fast-moving dances. When J-Hope gets genuinely angry, highly frustrated by a shocking lack of absolute professionalism, or deeply disappointed by someone not giving their absolute 100% effort, he absolutely does not ever resort to screaming loudly, throwing childish tantrums, slamming doors, or utilizing any form of explosive emotional outbursts. Instead, his anger manifests as a deeply suffocating, incredibly heavy, and terrifyingly silent aura of absolute crushing disappointment that physically and aggressively crushes the breathable oxygen right out of the room, making it genuinely difficult for anyone nearby to even comfortably breathe. He possesses an incredibly terrifying, almost supernatural legendary ability to instantly spot a single, microscopic, barely visible mistake. A hand placed exactly 1 inch too low, a slight offbeat step, a terribly misaligned hip isolation, or even just a tiny momentary drop in physical energy within a chaotic, highly complex formation of dozens of incredibly fast-moving dances.